Come in out of it. Mind the step. The stone's worn smooth by 100 years of boots, and the rain has made it slick tonight. There, shake the wet from your coat and let the door close behind you. You can barely hear the latch over the storm, and that is how we like it here. This is the Hollow Oak, the last inn on the moor road, named for the old tree that has stood beside the gable longer than any wall of it. The tree is split down the middle and quite hollow, and on a night like this, the wind moves through it and makes a low sound, like breath. Pay it no mind, it has been breathing far longer than you or I. There is a fire, and there is a chair waiting for you near it, and there is no need to give your name. Travelers come to the Hollow Oak when the road floods and the dark comes down too fast, and they stay until the rain decides to let them go. I keep the lamps and I keep the ledger, every night, every guest, every tale told by the fire. That is the toll here, not a coin. A story. Sit, get warm. Your eyes are already heavy, and that is well. You needn't stay awake for all of it. The tales are told slowly, and they are told to be drifted off in the middle of, and the rain will keep watch when you can't. Listen, the others are already here. A woman in a grey travelling cloak, hands held to the flames. A man who came in from the West Road and has not stopped looking at the window. And one chair drawn closer to the fire than the rest, with no one in it that I can see, though the cushion is warm. We do not ask about that chair. Whoever shall begin, begin. The night is long, and the rain has only just settled into its rhythm. The woman in grey speaks first. She says, "Where I come from, there is a village cut off from the mainland twice a day by the tide. A stone causeway runs out to it, low and straight, and when the water comes in, the causeway vanishes beneath it as though it were never there. For as long as anyone remembered, a man lived in a little house at the mainland end, and his whole work was to keep a lantern burning through the dark hours, so that any traveller caught by the tide would see the light and know where the safe stone ended and the drowning began." He was an old man by the time she knew him, and careful and kind in the gruff way of people who live alone with the sea. Every evening he climbed the post and lit the lamp, and every morning he climbed it again and put the flame out, and in between he watched. He had pulled more than one cold traveller off the causeway in the black of night, men who had misjudged the tide and would have walked straight on into deep water if his light had not stopped them. So the village trusted him the way you trust a thing that has always simply been there. One autumn, on a night much like this one, rain and no moon, the old man lit his lamp as always and settled by his window to watch. And out across the water, where there was nothing but the sea and the drowned causeway and the far dark line of the island, he saw a second light, a small steady flame, the colour of his own, burning out where no post stood and no man could stand, for the tide was full in and the stone was 10 feet under. He told himself it was a fishing boat. He told himself it was his own lamp thrown back by the wet air. But the light did not bob as a boat would, and it did not flicker as a reflection must. It burned as steadily as his, and it hung at exactly the height a lantern hangs when a careful man lights it on a post at dusk. And slowly, over the long hours, he understood that it was answering him. When he turned his flame up, the far light brightened. When he let it gutter low to save the oil, the far light dimmed to match, as though something out on the water kept a lamp the way he kept his, and was glad at last to find another keeper in the dark. He did not sleep. He watched it until the tide turned and the grey came up, and as the water drew back off the causeway, the far light thinned and faded, the way the morning takes a candle. And there, where it had burned, out past the last real post, where the stone ran on under the receding water toward the island, he saw, just for a moment, the shape of a post that was not there in daylight. A lamp post, leaning, salt-blackened, with a dark figure at its foot, climbing down. Then the sea filled the space where it had been, and it was only water again. He kept his lamp every night after, the way he always had, but he never again turned it up to its full brightness for fear of how brightly the other would answer. And on the stillest nights, the villagers said, you could stand at the mainland end and see two lights out over the drowned causeway, burning steady, keeping faith with one another across the dark water. One for the living and one for whatever it is that waits patiently for the living to lose their way. She finished her tale, the woman in grey, and held her hands a little closer to the fire. The man by the window had not turned from the glass. It is the man's turn, but he shakes his head, and so an older voice takes up the quiet. One of the chairs in the shadow, I could not say which. He says, I kept sheep once, up in a high cold valley where the fog comes over the wall in the evening and does not lift till noon. You learn to read a flock in country like that. You learn the lead ewe most of all, the Bell-Wether, we call her, for the little bell she wears, so that when the fog takes the world, you can still hear where the flock has gone. My lead ewe was a steady old girl, 6 winters on her, and her bell I had cast myself from a cracked pot, so I knew its voice the way you know a neighbour's cough. One evening the fog came down thick as wet wool, and she went into it with the flock behind her, and her bell going soft and even. And then the bell stopped. Just stopped, mid-field, the way a clock stops. I called and got nothing back but the drip of the fog off the wall. She came home at dawn. They all did, every sheep accounted for, standing quiet in the fold as though they had never strayed. But the old ewe wore a bell that was not mine. A fine bell, brass, with a clear, cold ring to it, and no smith in the valley had cast it, and no farmer had a bell gone missing, and there was no way under heaven that a thing like that could have come to be around my ew's neck in a single foggy night on an empty moor. I should have taken it off her. I have thought about that every night since, but a new bell is a new bell, and times were lean, and so I let her keep it. And after that, when the fog came down of an evening, the flock would grow restless and stand all facing the same way, toward the top of the valley where nothing was, and the old ew's new bell would ring once, by itself, with no wind to move it. And one night near winter, she led them up into the fog, and the clear, cold bell went on ahead of them, ringing, and not one of them came home. I followed the sound till near dawn. It always stayed the same distance ahead. And when at last it stopped, I was standing at the top of the valley, alone, in a place I did not know, with no flock and no bell, and the fog just beginning to lift off ground that had never held grass. I came down that mountain, and I never kept sheep again. The fire has burned low. Someone sets another log on it without being asked, and in the new light, a third traveler leans forward. Only their hands and the edge of a face, the rest in shadow. They speak more softly than the others, and you may find your eyes closing while they do. That is allowed. The tale will go on, whether you follow all of it or not. There was a house, they say, where a clockmaker had lived with his wife, and the house was full of clocks. He had made them all, and they had filled the rooms with their ticking for 40 years, so that the silence of that house was really a kind of music. 100 small heartbeats, never quite in time with one another. And when the old man died, his widow went through every room, and one by one she stopped them, reached up into each case and stilled the pendulum, and set the hands to the hour he had died, and closed the glass, until the whole house held its breath at the same minute and stayed there. She lived on in that stillness for years, and found a kind of peace in it, every clock in the house agreeing forever on the single hour that mattered. And then, one night, she woke to ticking. One clock, somewhere below, had begun again. She went down with a candle and found it, the long case clock in the hall, pendulum swinging, hands moving, though she had stopped it herself, and no one had touched it in a decade. And as she stood there, a second clock took up the beat, in the parlor, and then a third. One by one, all through the dark house, the clocks she had stilled began to tick again, each starting from the stopped hour, but none of them quite together, so that the old, uneven music she had silenced filled the rooms once more. She did not stop them again. She sat down in the hall in her husband's chair, the candle burning low, and she listened to all his clocks running on without him, a little out of time, the way they always had. And in the morning, the neighbors found the house quiet again. Every clock stopped at the hour, every glass closed, and the old woman gone from it, with her coat still on its hook and the kettle cold. Some say she only walked out into the world and kept walking, but the ones who knew the house best will tell you she simply went to where the music was at last, in time. The man by the window speaks now. He has been waiting all night too, you understand. He does not look away from the glass. He says, "I will tell you a small one, and then I will be quiet. Years ago, I sheltered from a storm in an inn on a road much like this one. There was a fire, and there were travelers around it, and the rain was very loud. And late in the night, a guest came in and took the empty chair by the fire, a traveler in a wet, dark coat, who sat down among us and held cold hands to the flame. No one had heard the door. That is the thing I have kept all these years. The latch on that door was loud. You had to put your shoulder to it. and not one of us by the fire had heard it open or close. But there he was, soaked through, the rain still running off him onto the warm stones, saying nothing, only warming his hands and looking into the fire the way a man does who has come a very long way in the cold. We made room. You always make room on a night like that. And one by one, we drifted to sleep in our chairs, as you are drifting now, and in the morning the storm had passed, and the strange guest was gone. His chair was empty, but the seat of it was warm, warm as if someone had only that moment risen from it. And the stones beneath it were dry, every other floor in the place still damp from the night, but under his chair, dry, as though the rain he brought in with him had been called back out into the storm, and he with it. And the man by the window finishes, and at last he turns from the glass, and he looks at the chair drawn closer to our fire than the rest, the one with the warm cushion and no one in it that any of us can see. And he smiles, just a little, and he says, "I have stopped at a great many inns since, on a great many rainy nights, and I have come to think that every one of them keeps a chair like that, a place by the fire for the guest who comes in from the rain, whom no one hears arrive." Then he is quiet, as he promised, and the rain goes on. There, the tales are told, and the toll is paid, and you have stayed awake longer than most. You needn't any more. I am going to go round and turn the lamps down, one by one, the way the old keeper turned his flame, and the room will go soft and amber, and then softer still. The fire will keep itself for a while yet. The chair by it is warm. The rain has set in for the whole night now. You can hear it has lost its hurry, gone steady and deep and even, the sound of water that intends to fall until morning. Let it. Let the rain keep its own counsel now. The ledger is closed. The door is latched against the moor. Whatever keeps a lamp out on the dark water, whatever rings a bell up in the fog, whatever comes in from the storm with no sound at all, they are all out there, and you are in here, by the fire, at the hollow oak, where you are warm, and you are watched over, and you have nothing left to do but sleep. Sleep now, we'll mind the rain.